At our April board meeting, I think you were there. I think it was Dr. Darcy Kruger from Cincinnati who said, I think it's between 50 and 60% of newborns are now diagnosed in utero.
Wow.
Which is amazing because.
So they're almost screening for it. I mean, well, not yet.
I mean, they see, the rhabdos,
right.
In the tests that they do beforehand or whatever. So that's very helpful. But for the adults out there and there are many, as you probably know, who don't know they have tuberous sclerosis
until they have a kid.
Until they have a child. Yep. And we see that over and over and over.
Yeah.
And reaching those people before they have the child, how do we do that?
Right.
And it's a monstrous challenge.
Yep.
For sure.
For sure. Yeah. Before we go too further into this, I want to hear a little bit about your background leading up to working at the TS Alliance. So kind of setting the stage.
Sure.
So
happy to talk about
to segue to that. Yeah.
I was very fortunate in college that I found out pretty early on what I wanted to do in my career. And I'll explain very quickly. My dad sold insurance for State Farm, and half my family still works for State Farm.
Really?
Of course, he wanted me to sell insurance and work for State Farm.
Of course.
To do that, you study finance. So I laugh so hard about this now because I can't stand math. But
you and me both.
Numbers. But so I went off to college to be a finance major, and my first year.
Now, did you go through high school being pretty adept at math and finance?
I graduated in the top 10 in my high school class.
That's good.
I did really well in algebra and all that stuff. And
so you had the skill.
Yeah, school was, especially high school, was fairly easy for me. And I think it's genetics. Both my sisters and I all did really well in school. And so I'm thankful for the genes from my parents. But,
yeah. I hear you.
Anyway, I went off to college, and long story short, my second semester, I took a required creative writing course. And for better or worse, I often procrastinated, and I would roll out of bed. My class was at 1, and, it'd be 10 in the morning or whatever, and I'd write something right off the top of my head. And about halfway through the semester, my teacher pulled me aside one day, and she said, Jay, you're a really good writer. You just have this natural, innate ability to write well. What's your major? And I said, finance. And we both laughed.
Really?
And she said, is that what you really want to do? And I said, I'm taking this accounting course and it's really kicking my butt. No, I don't want to do this. And, she was an English teacher, and she said, well, have you thought about being a teacher? And I said, I don't really see myself doing that. I'm kind of an introvert, but, she said, well, what about journalism? And have you thought about that? And I said, no. And she said, well, let me hook you up with a meeting with the dean of the journalism department. At least go talk to him. And I'm like, okay. So I went to talk to him, and in a roundabout way, I was like, I don't really know that I want to be a newspaper writer either. And he said, well, are you interested in business? And I said, absolutely. And he said, well, there's this field called public relations where you're kind of a creative person and a writer and a communicator, but you're in a business setting. You're not at a newspaper or whatever. And so he said, why don't you take an intro to PR course next semester and then come see me? So I took this course, and I had this super hardcore professor who everybody hated, but I loved him. And I was so moved by that first class, just the light bulbs went off. And so I switched everything. I switched my major to mass communications, what they call it. That's what my degree's in. And I have a marketing minor. So it all worked out really well. Then I got my very first job right out of college at a huge medical system in Texas called Scott and White. And they're not as well known, but they're set up exactly like the Mayo Clinic is. And what I mean by that is the Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinic and some of the larger they're called group practices. So all of the physicians are employees of the system. So we had, 600 physicians. The A&M College of Medicine was there. We had 14 satellite clinics, a hospital. To
Holy
get
mackerel.
that,
so that was your first job?
That was my first job. It was total boot camp.
Oh, you must have been terrified.
I was a little scared.
Or maybe you didn't know.
I was so
like I'm thinking about that, like, oh boy.
Well, you
were into it though.
I was into it big time.
That makes a huge difference.
We had a syndicated radio show, a syndicated newspaper column. I was basically hired to do employee communications. So I did the employee newsletter, but they did news conferences all the time. I remember when liposuction first came out. This had to be, 86, 87 probably. And we had a news conference about it at the hospital, and the doctor literally pulled a wagon in with a big glass vial of fat, literally, that had been sucked out of somebody, to be, quite frank about it. But, those types of things, I look back, I was so fortunate to get that job because it really laid the groundwork for everything that I did. I knew I was hooked on health related communications, and I knew that those were the types of settings that I wanted to work in versus corporate. And from there, I went to work for the Multiple Sclerosis Society in Houston for a few years, where I was hired to they do this huge bike tour called the MS 150.
Okay, and I think I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's like this 2-day, I think all the MS chapters do them. It's like a 2-day event. The one that we did in Texas was the second largest in the country. We had, I want to say, it's been so long, 4,000 riders over 2 days, and they go from Houston to Austin. But it's a fundraising special events job. And at the end of that year, I realized that was not for me. I was not a fundraiser. That was not my thing whatsoever. So I left there and worked for a private practice for a group of psychologists for a while. And then, the whole DC move came about, and I worked in hospitals again. Then I worked for a hospice program for a while. And then I decided to try my hands at an ad agency. I thought, this will be really cool. And so I went to work for this ad agency there in the DC area. And even though I worked on healthcare accounts and got to do some pretty cool stuff, I absolutely hated this setting. And
did you?
I learned a lot about, it's a very different type of writing than you do in healthcare settings or corporate settings, because you kind of throw the rules out the window when you're writing for advertising, whereas there's still things like periods and commas and all of that stuff kind of goes out the window. So I learned some pretty cool things for my toolkit there, but I just, it's like a law firm. You have to bill every 15 minutes, and there's huge pressure to bill. So, I worked there for 2 or 3 years, and honestly, I struggled the entire time because, ultimately, I think people that work in nonprofits are a different breed. And I mean, you're just...
Well, you're driven differently.
Yeah, and it's just this innate thing that I can't even really put my pulse on, but I just think there's people that are meant to work in nonprofits, and there's people meant to work in the corporate environment, and it's a good thing that there's both types.
Right.
So I realized...
So you figured it out.
Yeah, and that ultimately led me to the TS Alliance.
Okay, that's pretty cool. How did you end up finding the TS Alliance?
I saw an ad in a paper.
I was just going to say, was it something simple?
It was just this. You may have heard me say this when I spoke at the board meeting, but at the volunteer dinner, but I literally saw this 2, maybe 3 sentence ad in one of the local newspapers. It wasn't even the Washington Post. It was some local Rockville, Maryland newspaper. And I don't remember the ad exactly, but it was basically communications marketing director, whatever it was. And that was the time when you literally faxed your resume still. So I remember faxing my resume over, and yeah, so I took it, I went and had my interview and I, was offered the job and, I took it and there were a couple things I remember. That was in 2004 and,
okay.
I'm getting old, so my memory's not
I hear
super
you.
great.
Do your best.
I remember I had never heard of tuberous sclerosis complex and, I had worked in healthcare at that point more than 40 years. So, I think I was pretty typical of most anybody, but the website, I remember the website they had was a complete, utter mess. And
was it?
I had done many websites at the ad agency and at a couple of jobs previous to that. So I knew I could fix the website. So that's when I started in 2004. And that was kind of my first big project, was to redo the first iteration of the website. So that's how it all started.
Oh, wow. I don't remember what the website used to look like. And I feel like I dropped off the online scene for like a period of years when my kids were things were really going on. So I don't remember, but I do remember when I got back around to it thinking, wow, this is really great.
I think our current site is probably the fourth major redesign since I started in 2004. So we typically update it, redo it about every 4 or 5 years. Every time we do it, we try to simplify it as much as possible. It's really, really hard because tuberous sclerosis, they don't use the word complex for nothing. It's a complex disease. And so all of the different manifestations, all of the different programs that we offer, all of those different things have to be crammed into our website. And when we ported over the site previous to the one we have now, there were more than 800 separate pages.
Oh,
I think we got
gosh.
down to 300 something on the current site.
Wow.
But for the current site, we spent 2 years planning it, and we literally every department was involved. It wasn't just me. And we looked at every single page of those 800, weeded them out, combined them, deleted things that were no longer applicable, and then literally just kind of started over. And how can we put this together in a new way? And I still get comments from people. It's too hard to navigate. And, I get it. But,
I don't know how you could make it any simpler in a lot of ways.
I'm always open to suggestions.
Right.
I can tell you that because, we've tried to target it as much as, who's the user. So when you come there's a header for researchers. There's a header for healthcare providers. There's a header for individuals with TSC. And then within that section, we have it for adults, parents, teens, whatever, to hopefully people, at least when they come, something's obvious to click on because, it's a lot. I get it. And it's constantly evolving.
Right. And I think that it would be hard to make everybody happy with one web platform. So you probably have to, I can imagine that took a lot of thought and planning to think, what is the best, what's the most, almost like triage. How do we put this out there in a way
that, and we did, involve some like smaller community focus groups. Typically at our DC meetings, we could, I could pull some people into a room that are there for the march on Capitol Hill or whatever and talk to them about it. Ultimately, you're right though. I mean, there's some people who aren't happy with it. That's probably not correct, but it's not working in the way they would prefer. And I encourage anybody who has issues or whatever to just contact us or me because I want to know what that is and see if we can fix it for them.
That's a brave stance because opening yourself up to...
Well, it's true. Everything we do...
Oh, I know. I was just going to say that you guys are really open to feedback. And I don't know. I can see how that would be challenging at certain...
It is, and I, getting back to Facebook a little bit.
So you were working at the TS Alliance and your first project was the website. And then it kind of morphed from there into adding on responsibilities is kind of how I'm imagining it.
I had other responsibilities right out of the gate.
Okay.